for tonight's edition of the Paul Harvey, The Rest of the Story with Amanda Cadena.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're staying out of the rain today. This seasoned reformer came to North Carolina with the intent to change society. Some would have called her bold, while others would say she was out of place to get involved in political issues. But in all reality, anyone would have to agree with both assumptions. During the antebellum period, it was completely unheard of for a woman to speak her mind to a man, let alone important members of legislation. But she was no ordinary woman. She knew what she needed to be done and wouldn't take no for an answer. Maybe it was the teacher in her, wanting to change the future, or maybe she was born in the wrong decade. Either way, she left her mark in history and is still remembered today. It was a hard, long road in the previously nicknamed Van Winkle state. The government's interest was in making money, not spending it. But the reformer's voice was unheard, even after she pled her well-researched case. That is, unheard by the people she thought needed to hear her plan for change. While being pushed aside by those important members of government, thankfully she met the right person at the right time. After her main focus for coming to the state looked less like a reality, she focused full-time on the caring for a terminally ill woman who happened to be staying in her same hotel. Many would have considered this coincidence too convenient, maybe even planned, but they just didn't know her that well. The reformer was taking care of Mrs. Dobbin of Fayetteville, while her husband was away in important meetings. A friendship grew immediately when the reformer heard of the woman staying in her hotel. She would visit Mrs. Dobbin in between meetings with important members of legislation for her uninterested reform movement. Always coming to vent to her new and only friend in this foreign state, she found a companion who was willing to listen to her reasoning for the reform sympathetically. Sadly, the woman passed quickly after their meeting, leaving the reformer to grieve on her lack of attention of her movement and the loss of her caring friend. After the death of her friend, the reformer probably contemplated leaving the uncaring state, but was surprised by the best gift she could have ever been given. And now for the rest of the story. The woman who the reformer was caring for, Mrs. Dobbin, was actually Mr. James C. Dobbin of Fayetteville's wife, a man who also happened to be an important member of legislation. After her death, many would have probably assumed the reformer of manipulating a dying woman to help her convince her husband, this influential member of legislation, to support her bill. Well, of course, this is exactly what happened. With his push and donation on the behalf of his deceased wife, a bill was passed to secure the beginning steps to the mental health reform of North Carolina. But there was no manipulation involved. The reformer sympathized with the dying woman because of her own background, not because she was aware of her husband's political and social status. As a young girl, this social reformer beat all the odds. Coming from an alcoholic and abusive family life, she fled her home in Massachusetts to live with her grandmother in Boston. There she excelled in academia, but had a constant struggle with her health. In 1821, she opened a school in Boston for wealthy children, but could not keep her door closed to those that suffered from poverty. She soon opened the doors to her own home to teach children who came from nearby poverty-stricken neighborhoods. Unfortunately, she once again began to suffer from health problems. She did not let her poor health stop her success. While on constant bed rest, she wrote many children's novels. By 1836, after nearly 10 years of suffering from illness, she decided that she would go for her final resolution in England. While in England, she met the Rathbone family, who invited her to stay in their home. The Rathbones were Quakers, who were Quaker social reformers, and heavily involved in the British lunacy social movement. After improving in health in England, this sickly teacher quickly transformed into a healthy reformer. She battled numerous state legislations for the equality and justice of those that suffered from mental illness, and in 1848 she was confronted with the North Carolina legislation that had no interest in hearing her plea. While still battling for her voice to be heard, she met a sickly woman who would probably remind her of herself. Mrs. Dobbin was only a few years older than she was, and every day that she lay on her deathbed, the reformer probably saw the life that many doctors had predicted for her own. This reformer was no gold digger, nor did she ever have a hidden agenda. Thanks to the kindness in her heart, Mrs. Dobbin was able to pass with dignity and ease, because she knew she would leave behind a legacy that wouldn't remember her as a sickly woman, but as a person who made a difference in many people's life. The reformer also left behind a legacy of her own and will always be remembered in the state of North Carolina. And now you know the whole story of Dorothea Lynn Dix.